Hello everyone. My name is Trish Popkin and I'm the Museum Succession Project Manager at the Ontario Museum Association, and I'm very happy to welcome you to the sixth webinar in our summer series. Can you just let me know in the chat if my voice is coming through okay? Great. Thank you very much. We are very pleased to partner with the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and Sport to present this Learning Lab summer series focused on supporting museums with the ministry standards for community museums in Ontario. At the OMA, we have been working with the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and Sport to provide resources relating to the standards at our website, and you can get to the CMOG Standards Resources page from our homepage. If you haven't checked back lately, the recordings and slide decks from our last webinars are now available on the CMOG Standards Resources page. But we are particularly pleased that this continued partnership allows us to present the Learning Lab summer series of webinars on collections, conservation, education and interpretation, exhibition and physical plant standards. The OMA has planned these webinars with subject matter experts to provide information on best practice, but also to provide a venue for you to connect with your museum and heritage advisors from the ministry to answer questions specific to the standards themselves. This is the sixth webinar in our summer series, but there's still one more webinar in the works for the summer, so please sign up for that as well. We are thrilled today that we have over 40 participants registered today from all over Ontario and beyond, and this is just a fantastic turnout. I wanted just to make sure that everyone knows how to participate. First of all, you should know that the slides from the webinar will be available on the CMOG Standard Resources page of the OMA website, along with a recording of this webinar. So you don't need to worry about writing down every word. You can see the slides and you will hear the presenters speak. If you would like to ask a question or make a comment, simply type your message into the chat box at the bottom of your screen and click send. If you do not want everyone to see your question, you can send it privately to the presenters by using the Send To drop-down menu and selecting All Presenters. I will be monitoring the chat and we will do our best to ensure that all of your questions are answered. We only have just over an hour today, so if there's anything that we do not get to answer in this webinar, please identify it in your evaluation. As you can see on the agenda, after this intro, I will pass the mic to Dave Hollands, who is our presenter today. Please feel free to ask any questions about the content of the webinar during his presentation. After Dave's presentation, there will be a 15-minute Q&A with Elke Weinstein from the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and Sport, and she will be able to answer any specific questions about the exhibition standard specifically. So now I would like to introduce our presenter. Dave Hollands is Head of Creative at the Royal Ontario Museum and is responsible for an in-house work group who designs special exhibitions, communications graphics, multimedia, and space alterations. Prior to the ROM, Dave worked for 20 years at Sears & Russell Architects, specialists in museum planning and design for clients throughout Canada and the USA. A licensed architect, Dave worked with the Renaissance ROM project team to advise on access and use requirements from the client's perspective. Presently, the main focus of Dave's team at the ROM is the development of major exhibitions designed to engage and inform diverse audiences. So I will let Dave take it from here.
Good afternoon and welcome. A couple of housekeeping things first. You may have noticed on that previous slide the date was yesterday's date, and much as in our business, given I know how we all work very tirelessly to meet incredible deadlines in the museum business, I haven't yet found a way to invent a time machine. But we are speaking to you from Thursday. The other thing I'd like to point out is that we just had a little last-minute difficulty with the fonts in the presentation, but rest assured that what you'll be able to see there posted afterward is a clear and crisp version of any of the texts that are in the presentation. So without further ado, I'd like to speak in two general areas. First, to just reference the Access for Ontarians with Disabilities Act and give you a really top-level view of what the requirements are and how the ROM has been participating in that for the last several years. And then proceed right from there into a series of case study examples to show the kind of things that we've been doing as initiatives. And just to let you know that I'm joined silently here by one of my colleagues, Joanna Contreras, who manages the entire Access program at the ROM, and who will be available at the end during the Q&A session, because I really defer to her incredible depth of understanding of how the AODA works, and how under her leadership, anyone who works at the ROM who has any kind of good or service to offer has been able to understand how we might be able to do that in more accessible ways through her work. So the AODA is designed in a kind of generous way to be stepped out over a number of years, and this was a very clever way of ensuring that the standards that are enacted there in legislation are something that we can all find the time to do a proper job of. And they're not all actually released at this point, but we did begin a couple of years ago with the customer service standard. And a number of organizations were on a short list, so colleges, universities, and certain cultural organizations, transportation network systems, were early adopters and were required to meet the initial standard for customer service. And that was 2 years ahead of everyone else. And everyone else at this point, as of January 2012, I believe, is expected, if you have more than a one employee and are offering a good or service in Ontario, that the idea is that you can make that good or service available in such a way that people of all abilities can get to those goods and services. So it's a pretty straightforward idea if it's distilled into this concept. Of course, what we make of that is a very big topic, and we'll hope to help you with that today. The other generous thing about the way the standards have been enacted is that one of the very first things that are asked of everyone who participates is that they come up with their own way of delivering their goods and services in a way that meets this requirement of access. And to be able to come up with a set of policies, procedures, and practices that you declare how you're going to go about doing it. And so that really gives people a chance to craft things in their own image, and to experiment, and to evolve how they offer these goods and services over time. One of the things I did when I looked at the participants list is paid some attention to the kind of learning that all of you expected to have as a result of the session. And there's quite a wide range of things there, as you might expect. But one of the very strong themes is the fact that we're all working with limited resources, and that this can look like quite a daunting exercise. And the ROM is not alone in that. Of course, we have large budgets for some of our exhibitions, but we're also constantly challenged to deliver the full range of things that we'd like to do for our visitors across all kinds of channels. And museums everywhere are finding themselves in this spot, and finding new and creative ways of delivering services. So you see here a short list. These are the kind of obvious things, perhaps, but I'm hoping through some of our examples that I can point out how we've succeeded, basically by asking for help. And so one of the things we did a number of years ago is we took people who were coming to the museum, people with different abilities that were finding that we were putting up more barriers than access, lodging visitor complaints, and we invited them to participate to help us understand where we could improve. And so we actually were able to convert a number of complainers, if you will, in some instances, to some of our best helpers, and people who really are able to look at things in development before they hit the floor and give us really good first-rate advice. And then we found that they're also some of our greatest now advocates, and they're real diplomats that are able to really present our case more publicly into their individual communities. So this is a very strong idea to find people in your own communities who can advise on the subject of access. And currently we have an access committee that meets several times a year and reviews projects that we have in the works, and helps us imagine how to make those better. Volunteers is one of the very most obvious things. We have, of course, an army of volunteers, people that love to help out at the ROM. They go through training, when they offer tours, and now we're able to offer a whole series of very particular tours that suits a broadened range of needs of our visitors. Partnerships, a very important thing. We now do major exhibitions with other museums. We find ways of sharing some of the costs and some of the effort involved in making aspects of the projects more accessible. And we have partnerships of all kinds, corporate, with teaching organizations, students, and so on. Really, whatever the particular piece of talent that we may need, there often is a way of finding a win-win benefit where we each have something to offer each other. Colleges is a great example. George Brown College, for example, is helping us with our American Sign Language tours. And well, we use volunteers and partnerships and students in ways where there's an awful lot of gift in kind, people volunteering and giving us things pro bono. We're also aware of the fact that there are people whose business is providing accessible services, and so that there's always a kind of proportion there. Like, for example, we will use a donated service, like someone giving us a sign language tour or helping us design a tour. But we'll also hire the services of people who provide that. And it's about, I would say, in rough proportion, something like 30% giving and 70% purchasing on our part. And then last but definitely not least, we find that people want to give funding to this idea. We often find there are things kind of behind the scenes that aren't big or important enough for people to attach their names to. People love to give money for bricks and mortar or more visible or tangible things, but boy, this is a subject where we have found people have come out and really supported us. And so when you're finding that you think that the kind of things I'm showing you may be expensive, yes, some of them are, and there are ways of doing things more cheaply, but I'm going to show you some examples here that give you a sense of the range of things that can be done for the kind of money that might be available. Beginning with the concept of inclusive design, and here I want to draw a distinction between things that are clearly seen to be kind of add-ons that look like a kind of special provision within exhibits, as opposed to this more generic idea of making sure that the kind of things that go into exhibits that help to communicate work for a broad range of audience and visitor needs and preferences. And so our first choice is always for something that feels much more universal, so something that we might do for one need is suitable for a bunch of other needs. But of course, every now and then it still makes sense to create something that might be separate and special and will suit some particular requests on the part of our visitors. I begin with this slide, and I'm going to try to describe the visuals in the presentation in the way that we do described presentations in the museum. I know that at least one of our participants may be using a screen reader, and I don't have much text in this presentation, so I'll try to describe what you're seeing here. So this is Kate Zankowitz, one of our educators, who is one of the co-chairs on our Access Advisory team, in one of our participatory galleries. So we do a lot of facilitation in galleries, so this is where, rather than spending money to build something, if you're able to have people that can help to deliver the service, then you've got a very adaptable kind of technique that you can work with because people can respond to individual needs of visitors. So this is Kate working with a couple of kids with a snake skin. I'm not an animal scientist. I'm imagining this is a constrictor of some kind, because you can see in the scene on the right that she's wrapping this snake skin around the two kids and they're just loving it, and imagining what this thing might have been like in life. And the little boy happens to be blind, but this is the kind of experience that would work for any child. And one of the things I'd like to point out is that one of our early advisors on one of our early advisory teams was a young man, and who was blind, and we had also an older gentleman who's been blind all of his life. And we learned by speaking to the two of them that their kinds of experiences and desires for ideal museum experience very, very different. A young man wanted to participate by going around the museum with his family, doing all the things that his brothers and sisters did. And the gentleman said, "Don't make me walk around the museum just to touch the 12 things that you have that are tactile. I'd rather have a kind of armchair experience that you could deliver to me, maybe even at home or in your library." So that really was a learning for us, that there's a really broad range of needs and there's no one size fits all kind of solution. This next slide is showing a scene from our Ultimate Dinosaurs exhibition, and you see in the foreground a little skeleton, which is one of the fossil casts, a label which is done in very large three-dimensional signage, and then some short text, and then in the background a visual of what the dinosaur might have looked like in life. And this scene incorporates a whole variety of things put together that deliver the message. And we felt that this would be for families. We had people that have low cognition, that don't have a lot of understanding of what dinosaurs are like. And we wanted to create an experience that could deliver primary messages in a really simple to understand, a kind of plain speech. But that didn't mean that we didn't also have scholarly presentation with the kind of deeper layers that the curator had to offer. But we just hired a specialist illustrator to make sure that the poses of the specimens matched up with the ones of the skeletons, and to make you feel like you'd come away actually experiencing dinosaur life, even though all you were looking at were skeletons. And we know that kids love dinosaur names, so that's why making the dinosaur names is one of the most prominent thing, would be one of the most prominent things in the exhibition. This slide shows what I called an all-in-one label. And we were hoping through this to give you a way of finding out about each of the dinosaurs like a real character brought to life. And there's a range of techniques built all into this one label. On the right hand side there is an iPad built in, and you can swipe the pages of the iPad and find out about the curator's stories of discovering the animal in more context. On the left is a raised line diagram where you can actually feel the skeleton. So if you were unable to see the skeleton on display, you could actually feel what that skeleton feels like. And then there's Braille there as well, with some very simple plain language introduction to the animal, as well as deeper layers of writing about it. Now, one of the things to consider in an exhibit when you're trying to proportion the spend is, if you have accessible features, you may want to spend them on the aspects that are really prominent in the storyline. So the Earth was one of the principal players in the dinosaur exhibition because the Earth changed. It took a great, unbelievable amount of time to do so, and it separated the continents, and the animals evolved up separately on them, and that was the storyline of the exhibition. So we spent money on making sure that everyone had access to this concept. There was a film you can see in the upper left-hand corner of this slide that showed the continents moving away from each other. We managed to create that film by going online and buying bits of it that already existed and putting it together in a new way for our audience, with permission from the originators of those ideas. We built a game. Some people learn better or differently than other people, and so there's a way of finding out how to put the continents together and divide them yourselves by moving them in an interactive thing. And then on the right of this slide you see part of a timeline where we actually had the continents in a raised line visual that repeated throughout the exhibition, so that you could keep encountering, well, what were the continents up to at this stage of the game? And that as well had Braille text that repeated what was there in the title of the timeline. So this notion of integrating a number of features that can appeal to a wide range of interests and learning abilities is something we try to do in all kinds of exhibits. So this is a slide taken from our Dead Sea Scrolls exhibition, where you see the idea of where the scrolls were found. So there's a little bronze model of the site of these caves where the scrolls were found, a film showing the actual spot, and then a diagram showing the kinds of place nearby where its speculation was about where these might have originally been generated or used. So again, it's the idea of a combination of elements that come together and taken together can deliver the story across multiple channels. So the idea of redundancy in the exhibition through different things that are really delivering the same idea in different ways. This is a scene from our Maya exhibit, which we partnered with the Canadian Museum of Civilization, who helped us with some of the tactile elements. We shared the cost of these, and it was one of the most desirable things that we found in our exhibitions when we travel them, that when we offer the different bits and pieces that people might take if they're hosting one of our shows, that these are often the most popular among many different kinds of pieces that are on offer. So this, what you see here, is a mask that's displayed behind glass inside of a display case that nobody is allowed to touch. But kind of companion piece on an information reel outside of the display case, together with braille text and very simple descriptor of it, and then a kind of simulation, a model. We often call these models because they're not meant to be strict reproductions. People are not led to believe that we're trying to fake something. We're trying to give you an alternative experience of the real thing. In our current exhibition, Mesopotamia, Inventing Our World, we see here a cylinder seal, which is a tiny little thing, very hard to understand without seeing its physical impression. It's something you roll across clay, and it makes a picture. And so we had a very huge scale enlargement made that everybody could touch in order to understand it. And this is something that appeals to kids. It appeals to people with a low vision that have a hard time with the real objects. And of course, there's a little tiny model of a real one, and then this big version that we were able to do by working actually with the guys who make our dinosaur casts, because they could laser scan the little real object and the impression, and then do a computer cut big version of it for us to put on the wall. Space is the next topic, and it's a very big topic, and I'm going to address it in a really simple general way. When you think of laying on an exhibition, everyone has demands for space. The number of objects and storylines all have to fit in there. The groups that tour the exhibit are looking for ways of taking you through large numbers of people in ways that won't be disruptive. People who bring their scooters or wheelchairs to the exhibit look for space to work in a certain way for them. They don't like to have a sense that they have to go through bottlenecks. They like to have alternative routes available to them if the place gets crowded and you want to come back and see something that everybody else has been looking at you didn't quite get a chance to see. So I'm just showing two really simple techniques that we've been using lately. One of them is a view from a single security camera in the space. And those of you who have security cameras in your museums, everybody's aware now that they're being watched in all kinds of public facilities everywhere. This does not seem to be an invasion of privacy, but we can use this to look for patterns of behavior. So this is a single point in an exhibit in our Terracotta Warriors exhibition, and there are three views on the left here. One just as we opened, the visitors aren't quite in the first display, one kind of midday, and one at the peak period in very crowded situation. And we're able to look at this and say, oh, what's happening in front of a TV set? What's happening in front of an object? What happens in front of the different kinds of media that we're offering people? And we see that people stand a certain distance away from a small TV, or they stand a certain distance away from a big film projection. And so on the right here is a floor plan that our designer did for us, where he imagines the light traffic part of the day in front of each thing, and there's a kind of ring drawn around it to show how close people are, and the heavy traffic period of the day, which is a bigger ring, and then you start to see interferences. And so we take this learning of what are kind of ideal amounts of space from that, and you don't need a security camera to do this. Of course, you can go to your space and you can watch people and record this kind of information. But this is something that we then widely share among people that are designing all of our exhibits, and so that there's something that we can all use. This is a floor plan in this slide showing our current exhibition, Mesopotamia, and you'll notice a bunch of squares running through the storyline of the exhibit, and these are little actually cube-shaped rooms. And my point here is that we had a design for this where we wanted absolutely everybody to go visit each of these rooms because they were making a specific kind of modernistic point about the ancient past. And part of the advice we have for people who have been visiting our exhibitions using wheelchairs or scooters is, give me another way around something that might be a bottleneck, as I mentioned earlier. So this current design allows you to go into these things, or actually to ignore them and go around them. It's maybe a simple point, but we actually had to really work quite hard to make sure that the exhibit functioned in that way. I'm going to talk about access to aspects of our exhibits across a whole wide variety of types. This is one of our permanent galleries, recently opened, the Galleries of Rome and Byzantium. And it was one of a very long string of exhibitions, or permanent gallery installations, as a result of our Renaissance ROM makeover of galleries. And there are a number of things that we learned because we paced those out. We did it in a number of phases. So this is one of the very last ones. And of course, it benefited from the learnings from some of the earliest installations. we tried very hard to put out a very encyclopedic collection in the earlier displays, using space top to bottom. So there were labels placed down low, there were objects placed up high. We really wanted to give people the chance to be exposed to a great deal of material. And what you see in this shot is a kind of learning that came away from that, maybe an obvious thing, but we've been much more editing that down. So you see here a way of doing the information design that doesn't go below a certain height. And we don't put the objects or images above a certain height. And so there's a kind of sweet spot zone in the middle there that we're trying now to really concentrate things. And that's not to say we don't still put labels down low. If we put them down low, we now, if you go to our Mesopotamia exhibit, you'll see some labels very close to the floor, but they have their own light source, and they're done in a point size that's almost twice the size of standard labels. So that if we have a situation where we really want to move outside the boundaries of the sweet spot, you take special action. And I'd like you to all imagine doing something here for a moment in trying to find out what that might be. You know, we use our advisors to find out where those places are. We have people who are petite in size, who use wheelchairs, who help us imagine what it's like approaching an exhibit from a lower eye level. We have tall people. We try to meet some kind of range that represents kind of normalcy across all abilities. But imagine this exercise for each of you. If you were to hold a book in your hand and hold your arm outstretched, stiff, directly across from your eye level, and imagine that's a label. And it's a book cover that has a picture on it, it has a title, it has some small text, so it represents the kind of range of things that you might find in a display. Now rotate your arm up without bending the elbow, and you'll notice as you go, let's say, above your eye level, that it starts to angle and angle down towards you. So imagine things you might put up there ideally would be angled down towards you in order to have a good point of view. And if you do the same thing, rotating your arm downwards, all the way down until it meets your side, or your hand is hanging down at your side, you can see that the view of the book is almost horizontal. And those are ranges that you can actually work with. And so we worked with our advisors on some of our displays and noted that even a label that looks good to most of us lying, say, flat down at the height of a desktop works a little better if you just incline it ever so slightly. And so we've been making sure that even our objects, even our labels placed down low at almost horizontal positions, always have that slight incline. Now I have a question here to raise my volume a little bit, so I'm going to do that. I'm not sure if that's any better. Okay, so to the next. This is a view of a slide to give you a sense of some of the guidelines that we work with, and a number of you asked about guidelines. And this is a very easy to understand kind of primer on the subject of preparing text for use for people with all kinds of different vision abilities. And it's produced by the CNIB, and it's available online, and it's very easy to understand, very graphical. It relies quite heavily on visuals and simple text on how to prepare graphics. And so what's illustrated here is the cover of the clear print accessibility guidelines and one sample page showing one of the features of designing typography in exhibitions or in print materials that you produce, any kind of collateral in a museum setting. And this one refers to contrast. And one of the things we try to do is to make sure that all of our text has at least a kind of 70% contrast. And that's to say that if you were to put black type on a white field, that's 100% contrast. But if you wanted to use gray type, Well, you would only gray back that black till it was 70% of black. And these are things that you can do now, of course, with word publishing programs and so on. You can actually look at the measurement of contrast of one color over on top of another. So in everything that we do, we try to make sure that we don't make things any less than 70% of one color on top of another. This next slide shows on the top there the same set of numerals produced with different kinds of fonts. And so in choosing a font selection, there's a kind of proportion that you can elect between the skinniness or thickness of the strokes and the overall size of the character. And this is borrowed from the Smithsonian set of accessibility guidelines, and I understood when I went and revisited that the other day that they actually borrowed that from Parks Canada. And the point is actually that there are a lot of things out there, and it's very easy now, of course, with search engines to do your own research if you just put in the right kind of keywords. And so selecting fonts is one of the things that you'll find a lot of information out there. And the ClearPrint guidelines suggest a very small set of fonts that are very workable. They're not always the ones that we use in our exhibits, but they're sort of guaranteed to work. At the bottom of this slide, you see a little idea that we've been using lately where we'll take a graphic and we'll run it through a color blindness emulator. And these are things as well that you can find online, and even in Photoshop it's one of the features. So you can take a finished graphic, and the one on the right is something that's showing you some sub-brands that we're planning to create under our new logo, and what they would look like as viewed by people with different types of color blindness. And there are several types that you can use the emulator to simulate. And the idea here is that even though the sensation of the color may appear different to someone with this different kind of vision, we still check to make sure that the contrast is there. So the readability or legibility still shows up even though it's been run through an emulator. I see here the question about the use of serif versus sans serif fonts in exhibitions. We use them both, and we look at legibility. We don't set a hard and fast rule. People come down on that, saying that one works better than the other. I don't believe that's true. I think that you really look at the way you set up your type, the way you've used the color, you test it with people, and then you decide on the various case-by-case basis whether or not something is truly working. And there's clearly certain fonts that do not work very well for people with low vision, and we just simply try to avoid those kind of situations. Moving to special provided instruments, and so this is the opposite of inclusive design in the sense that these are not always integrated experiences, but these are add-ons. And so this is for our Terracotta Warriors exhibition. On the right hand side you see a view of a model of a terracotta warrior that we actually purchased, and there's a lot of stuff actually available online, so as long as your label says that this is sort of like something that's in the exhibit, we found there are ways of giving people the experience of being able to touch something that's like an object in the exhibit. It may not be the same. So that was an experience for everybody, but we also made available, if you wish to go through the exhibit, a booklet that had braille and raised line diagrams, and these are fairly inexpensively produced, and you'll see in the resources at the end here of the talk places that you can have suppliers that can do these with you, or a large print guide with large visuals in it for people that wanted to go through the exhibition and have that kind of an aid. So this is an example page from the large print guide for the Terracotta Warriors exhibition, and there you see a reference to an object that's behind glass in a display case, and we did actually go online and found a pot kind of similar to this that we could purchase at a reasonable cost that we put out on a pedestal that was available for everyone to touch. So again, a kind of effort to make sure that a bunch of things in coming together gave a variety of ways of experiencing the same thing. These visuals here show a booklet of a couple of different types. One is for a tour of some of our cultural objects, and the other is a booklet of natural history materials, a variety of books that we've produced that are available for a sit-down experience or a walk-around experience. And you, depending on whether the exhibit's on, that these are companions to, or something that you'd like to do in our library, we give you the choice. And in the upper left-hand corner, you see a woman here uh, using a tactile diagram, a raised line diagram of our Chinese imperial tomb, to understand, of course, an object that you're not permitted to touch, even though it's open to view in the galleries. This may be one of the objects on our tactile tours that you are allowed to touch, with a facilitator helping and describing an appropriate way of touching, wearing gloves. One of the really key things here for us in designing these diagrams is that there's a lot of good guideline information that you can find on the web about how to make a diagram that actually works well. And we were quite concerned that some of the things we were showing were views of things in perspective. So these are things with receding lines, vanishing points, and the kind of things that we weren't certain that some of our users who may have never seen the world with a sense of perspective wouldn't be able to understand. And any of you who attended the OMA symposium where John Kennedy made his presentation, this is somebody who's been doing analysis for people that demonstrated that many people who may have been born blind are actually able to deal with perspective quite well. Thank you very much. And so we're a little less concerned about that. And we've been experimenting with views of objects that aren't just flat on views and seeing what the feedback is. This next shot shows 2 pages from a family guide that we created for the Ultimate Dinosaurs exhibition. That, again, another channel of way of finding out about the content for different kinds of thinkers and different kinds of learners. So we knew this would appeal to kids. It was a great kind of souvenir piece that people took home with them, and so there was learning after the exhibit. The kids in this story meet up with the major characters from the exhibition. They meet up with Charles Darwin and they learn about evolution. And it even includes little sample visuals that you can use our augmented reality experience, a free app that was available, to make little dinosaurs actually virtually appear on your own dining room table at home through the app. So a great kind of multi-experience for people. As well as a throw on the back cover of this thing to our iTunes University course. And all we did was take the information that was in the show, all of the assets that were in the exhibition, and we leveraged them into a course that we make available online for free. And so again, another kind of channel where you could have a home experience where you could use screen readers and so on to have a more accessible way of getting at the very same content. This next view shows a technology that we've begun to use in our exhibitions, which is a very thin glowing panel. And so the view on the left is of one of these panels before it's built into one of the displays. And because of LED technology, these are very low voltage. They use very low energy, so they're great from the point of view of not spinning hydro. And so they allow us to use backlit graphics in our more dark space theatrical exhibitions. And as we move forward with more and more of these kind of dramatic presentations, it's a great way of having labels that are easier to read, quite frankly. And so in the current exhibition about Mesopotamia, we were able to turn the house lights off with our new display cases with built-in lighting, featuring lighting on the objects and on the object labels, and then on these overview panels off to the side, in a way that made separate experiences that you could access separately, each of them having their own prominence because of the lighting. And so these panels on the right-hand image here show the glowing overview texts that are on the outside of the display cases using these panels. And these cost, I think the particular one we're seeing here, these are about the human height, these panels. I think they cost us about a couple of $100 each. So for people with challenged budgets, that's not the greatest thing in the world to hear, but we recycle these things. Here's a view of 2 other exhibitions where we've used them. So the one on the left is our Terracotta Warriors exhibit, where we had this kind of money shot where you rounded a corner, and there were all of the warrior figures. There's a specific question about serif versus sans serif fonts, which I'll deal with afterward. Yes. So bear with me for a minute because the slide view has disappeared from view here. I'm going to continue to blather on, if that will help. Um, it looks like the image was back there for a minute. So what it showed was this dark space with the terracotta warriors with their own uh, underlighting in a very dramatic way. And we didn't want this to be a case where we had special lighting on the objects and then it was very hard for you to read the labels. So we used one of these glowing panels built into a frame with a glowing label that you would read in association with looking at the terracotta figures. The view on the right here is of a similar panel, and we actually took the very same glowing panel out of the terracotta show and we recycled it into this new display and put new graphics on top, where we had these big murals that we had created to show the dinosaurs in life, and then we interpreted them with these backlit panels where you would see the animal, same mural, just reproduced as a glowing graphic. And in this case we built an iPad into it, cut a hole in the graphic and put an iPad in underneath, and there you could visit with each of the animals and find out more about them by swiping the pages of the iPad. Main point being here is that whatever we initially invested in these glowing panels, we're going to be using them a long time into the future because they are expected to have a great long life. This next view shows a scene from a couple of installations. On the left is one of the cube rooms in the current Mesopotamia exhibit, where we give you this kind of modern perspective on the fact that the origins of writing can be found in ancient Mesopotamia. And here we're visiting with Eleanor Wachtel, who of course runs a CBC show, Writers and Company, who is giving us her point of view about this ancient invention. As we use, of course, many videos presenters in our exhibits now, a very adaptable medium that gives us a way of having content delivered across a lot of different formats. So you can hear the video if you can hear. If you can't hear, you can read the closed captioning. You can select with a button a language choice. Sometimes those are touch screens where the choices are made on screen. And one of the things we learned from our advisors is that we used to float these captions. If you go to a foreign film and you see subtitles, you can often see them done badly. The insistence here is that we always do it on a black band, so that we have white text on a black field, so that the captioning is really easy to read and understand. And we found that these work for absolutely everybody. In a really crowded exhibit, people who can't hear over the din are now able to read what the person is saying while they're saying it. And now with some of our deaf advisors on our advisory committee, there's a movement to include American Sign Language as well. And we don't yet do this, although you see here on the right-hand side of this slide an ASL interpreter who was interpreting one of our installations, which was our Out From Under exhibit that Ryerson produced, and we hosted it at the ROM. And so this is the entire text of the exhibit was made available through a podcast with sign language. And so we're imagining a future where for people who are deaf, for whom reading may be in fact their second language, and for whom communication through sign language is in fact their first and more natural way of communicating, that sign language may be the preferred way of finding out about the kind of content that we would be providing through some of the media in our exhibit. So this is a move we haven't yet made, but something we're looking that we may be able to do in the near future. And there's something where, again, we will rely very heavily on volunteers, providers who do this for a living, colleges who are teaching this kind of thing. Currently we have people coming from George Brown, for example, and who are helping us set up some of the sign language tours that we conduct in our permanent galleries. And this is done by visiting, by announcing in advance that you're interested in having such a tour, and then we'd be able to accommodate you by setting a particular date to do that. So I'm ending with tactile experiences here. We found that, and as I'm sure most of you have in your own museums, that there's nothing like the real thing. And if we have a March break set of activities and we put out a dinosaur bone and people come up and have a look at that, and when they find out that they're allowed to touch it, what's the first question that everybody asks? Thank you, Elka. Is it real? And boy, as soon as they find the answer to that is yes, all hands are on that thing. And so this visual here shows a model on the left-hand side, which is a full-size, it's actually a cast, it's a reproduction of a very tough kind of fiberglass cast of a vertebrae from Argentinosaurus, the largest land animal ever discovered. So these are kids whose size is actually dwarfed by this single vertebra. And on the right-hand side, you see our paleontologist, Dave Evans' hand holding some real fossil dinosaur teeth. And he goes every year to this kind of get-together down in the States where you can kind of buy fossils, and there's this big kind of swap meet. And so he bought us a whole bunch of dinosaur teeth at a fairly reasonable cost because we knew these would be great teaching collections way on into some foreseeable future. And of course, we do have teaching collections. Many museums do, and these are things that sit in a special category of accessioning. Sometimes they're accession, sometimes they're not. These are materials that we know that maybe we have duplicates, maybe these are things that won't be harmed by the kind of touching we have in mind to do, or things that we really feel, okay, we're going to let them degrade over the course of time because the educational value is simply worth it, and that we have other material that can be preserved, like a clone. So we took this learning and we've been using it ever since in our major exhibitions. What you see here in this view is a touch table in the Ultimate Dinosaurs exhibition. Some things can be touched and some can't. And so there's some really heavily bolted down real fossil material. Kids actually broke one of the bones here. We shouldn't be surprised by these kind of things. We know that this kind of stuff happens. And so we epoxied it back together and put a stronger mount in. And this is kind of stuff of course, all of you learn from this kind of thing every day. And we like to think we're not naive in that category, but we learn this every day. But on the left in this, you see a drawer under plexiglass with a lock. And it shows little specimens just the way they would appear in the paleontologist's own back of house study. And so that's a kind of learning of how stuff is handled behind the scenes. But the idea is that it's actually a drawer that can be unlocked by a facilitator when they're available. And we can't put a facilitator on the floor 24/7, or at least all the time that we're open to the public. But on a Sunday afternoon when the place is packed, maybe there's a volunteer, or maybe the curator can be persuaded to come in, and then they can open the drawer and hand those little teeth around. And boy, is that ever an important moment for our visitors. And so this is one of the aspects that we're traveling with the exhibition. We're sending along spare sets of teeth. And in addition, we have a bronze tooth that's bolted down to one of the displays, and that's indestructible. And so when you can't actually touch the real thing, at least we have a simulation. And so we do models more and more now in exhibit settings of the real thing. And one of the learnings we had when we had our advisory team look at some of our permanent galleries is they really like the idea of placing labels outside of the cases. And there's where we've been putting some of the second level interpretation that's a little more accessible. So graphics, text, braille, raised line, drawings, and models. And the view you're seeing here is the installation of our Maya exhibit at our partner museum, the Canadian Museum of Civilization. And this is something we affectionately called the monkey pot. And this is a ceramic piece from the Maya culture, a really ornate pot dressed up in the form of a monkey. And a great piece because of its really descriptive characteristics physically, but of course you can't touch it, the real thing. And so we have the great benefit of an artist in residence at the ROM. Georgia Gunther has worked there for, I think, almost 30, maybe a little over 30 years. Great talent. And of course you can find artists in your own communities who may be willing to help you. And we do very expensive models, many of them in bronze, but this is a ceramic model because the original piece was ceramic, and we found that we can do a little more cheaper stand-ins for the real thing now in certain kinds of materials that will last the duration of the exhibit. Some of them have outlasted the duration of the exhibit. And so just like the glowing LED panels, they find an afterlife And they'll end up in our hands-on discovery galleries. They'll end up parked as a kind of prop in the corner of a kid's classroom at the museum, or they'll travel with somebody going off to a trade show trying to show our wares. So these are things that are worth the investment, we feel. They have a tremendous amount of educational value within the body of the exhibit, and they have a time and a kind of afterlife after the exhibit has left us. In this case, of course, it travels with the exhibition, but when the exhibition's closed for good, it comes back to the ROM, and we use it in these various ways. This is another touchable from that exhibition. One of the major kings, who was one of the featured characters in the exhibition, King Pakal, has this amazing sarcophagus. This is a story unlike, or not unlike, the discovery of Tut in the Egyptian archaeological world. In the archaeological world of the Maya universe, this was a really key find. And we couldn't have the real thing. The real thing is in Palenque in Mexico. It's buried deep inside of a pyramid with really restricted access. But we thought, boy, if we could find a way to bring that to our visitors and to all kinds of visitors, what a selling point. So this is King Pakal's sarcophagus lid, reproduced through modern technology. Our partner, Canadian Museum of Civilization, is accustomed to making these kind of models, so they took this one on our behalf, and we shared the cost of all the models in the exhibit. We split 50-50, and so each of us got to build a number of them and use them and share them. And this lid was so big in its real size that this is actually a half-scale model, and it's still an enormous tabletop-sized model. So we have to tell everybody it's half the size of the real thing. It's made out of a durable material with a kind of spray texture on it to simulate the real stone of the real carved piece. And so the view here shows, on the top left view, a view of the thing which is lying down flat the way the real one does. We picked a height that you could reach over if you approach this using a wheelchair, with a space underneath for your knees to get in under and reach across. And then the reason it's half size is so you could get all the way around it and still reach out and reach into the middle of it. And so this is something that, sort of kids' arm's length was kind of what set the size of the final piece for us. And then you see in the view here on the right, it's now installed full-time in our kids' hands-on discovery space at the ROM. So expensive piece, but it's going to be there for many years to come. This view shows a bronze model of a house post from Canadian First Peoples West Coast culture, one of the key pieces in our First Peoples gallery at the ROM, which on the right-hand side of this view you can see is an enormous piece. It's taller than a person stands. It's one of the pieces that was emulated in the museum subway station as part of that art project. So everybody can actually touch one there that's kind of like this. But here in the gallery, this is a little scale model that you can touch on a table that's designed so that you can wheel up to it with a wheelchair. This table has a kind of strip at the ground that if you were to approach it with a white cane, that is cane detectable, so you don't bump into it. So it has a number of features that we work through with our access advisors to provide for a model of the type that you might put into a gallery on a permanent basis. This next view is of a dinosaur up in our permanent dinosaur gallery. And this is actually, we've had this dinosaur on display now for I think almost 20 years. So it was a very early idea of being able to put a touchable model into an exhibit setting. And this was a big hit. This was actually right at the front of the original display. And again, it was part of that universal design idea of, well, we've only got the bones, but what might a real dinosaur of this type been like, right down to the texture of the skin. And you can see this has been much loved. It has kind of shiny spots, not unlike Timothy Eaton's toe, which is also on display at the ROM. It has these kind of moments that allow us to see, well, hey, how have people really been using this thing? And it also incorporates a label. you see in this next view here, where the title of the object is there as raised text. There's a simple descriptor in raised text, and then overlaid Braille as well. And these are all bilingual, so that all of the features are there as a kind of all-in-one experience. And of course, people who are unable to see the real dinosaur behind glass are participating and understanding what this dinosaur is like. But of course, the rest of the world loves touching this thing and understanding it as well. This view is of one of the principal objects from the Maya exhibition. And I'm just letting you know we're on our last few slides here. This was one of the key pieces that introduced the notion of kind of hidden culture now revealed to us through these amazing pieces, and something that you really would want to touch given its really tactile qualities, and of course not able to touch. And we weren't going to build a model of this one. We wanted the highlight here of the experience to be looking at this object, but we made immediately available right off to the side the idea that you are going to go through an exhibition and experience a number of things that you will be allowed to touch that are stand-ins for the real thing. And here's the first one. And so this was a kind of orientation graphic that was done as a raised line diagram of the real object. So it included the English and French text that described that situation again as well. You can see here just on the right a hand symbol, a kind of icon that you'd find in the exhibition, as opposed to we also have a do not touch symbol that's a strike through prohibition kind of motif, and this is the one that shows you the difference between things that can be touched and things that cannot. This is a big deal for us. You probably experienced this yourselves. As soon as you start to introduce things that are tactile in exhibition settings, it's now driving our security force bananas because people are not understanding what's available and what's not available. And we hear such things as, you overhear things like a parent telling their child, oh, don't worry, if it's behind glass, you're not allowed to touch it, but if it's out in the open, go for it. I have a great view from the security camera of a child wandering around on the display platforms of our current Mesopotamia exhibition, going right up to the pieces. And we find parents that are not stopping their children from doing these things. So we've had to do a little bit more work now, making explicit the distinction between touchables and not touchables. And we do this now with little iconic signs. I'm just going to end here with the last couple of views. This is the model of Palenque, the downtown, if you will, of this key city in the Maya universe from our Maya exhibition. Our artist Georgia made this model. So on the upper left here in the view, you see the actual site. It's a ruin of the city core, if you will, the palace at Palenque. And you see this kind of stepped pyramid idea with a tower rising up out of the middle, a very unique feature in the Maya architectural world. And in the model, the same features done at a beautiful little small scale. And we know that kids love things that are oversized or undersized. They love the playing with scale. And so this was a big hit, this model. And it was made out of, again, a kind of very carefully crafted set of materials that were then coated in a really tough resinous coating with very contrasting colors, so that the features of temples, the forest, and the greater kind of landscape would be really easy to discern, either by looking at them or by touching them. And I just end with this visual here before we get to the resources of a tactile tour in our permanent galleries. And so these are tours where the docents are trained in describing what it is that you're looking at in the appropriate way of handling objects. People are using nitrile gloves, not latex gloves, in order to handle the objects. These are done on an irregular basis, but it's something that you can arrange to happen. And we're also able now, again through the good graces of some of our college connections, able to offer deaf-blind tours, which you can imagine a very specialized kind of training and tour interpreter is required for that. But it's an offering that you would imagine would be very difficult to make in a museum setting. But it's something that with the right kind of assistance you can certainly move forward with. And with that, I end with a couple of slides that you'll be able to get to, of course, on your own afterward with web links. But I point out here anyone that wants to get directly to the AODA in its primary format, you can see there the website as well. There's this kind of beautiful distillation of it into a really easy to understand employer handbook of the very first standard, which is the customer service standard. And I'd like to point out that the ROM isn't waiting for the built environment standard in order to figure out how to remove barriers to space. We're not waiting for all the other ones that haven't rolled out yet. We really take on board the idea that if you're trying to make your goods and services available, it meets the customer service standard, which is the very first one to come out. And really, it really has that primary objective of just asking yourself, imagining a different ability of a different kind, and how might I be able to offer that in my setting? Maybe it's not built in, maybe it's brought in on an occasional basis, maybe it's done through some kind of helper. But just imagining the full range of ways in which you make what you've already got available for people. One of the things I forgot to point out is in the Canadian Museum of Civilization's shot was that they went through in their particular version and they added labels outside the cases. So they created a stand that you could park outside your already existing exhibit and added the texts and models to those. So if you imagine trying to add kind of layers over top of what you've already got, you can do that online, you can create podcasts, other kinds of alternative media like these tactile books and so on, and leave your exhibits alone by augmenting them. This next slide shows two available resources from things that I participated in the last year. One was the OMA Accessibility Symposium, which was hosted at the ROM, and then last year's conference in Niagara Falls, where there was a specific presentation that Reich and Petch, the display firm and architectural practice, did a really great presentation, and I tacked my own case study onto the end of that. But I would really recommend looking at that one, because they really parse out the guidelines such as you see them at the Smithsonian as applied to their whole very wide-ranging experience in museum settings. Reference to connecting to the Smithsonian Access Guidelines, a link to a way of finding out about how to do tactile graphics, how to design your visuals so that it's easier to read and understand. There's a link to the CNIB Clearprint Guidelines. And then this last page shows some of our suppliers the ROM has been using. And as agency of the province of Ontario, we have purchasing guidelines that are fair practice, which means that what I'm showing you here are people we've used. I certainly recommend these people, but they're not the only ones, and so you're free to shop for these and other providers. But these are ones that were shown in the example. So the first one is Tactile Visions, somebody we worked with frequently in the Greater Toronto area to produce. These are basically paper type versions of tactile graphics. We found these really very affordable and very communicative. Eye-catch signs, the next one there is one of the providers of some of the more long-term kind of graphics, like those plastic graphics you saw in the dinosaur exhibition. The bottom one there is Research Castings International. These are the guys that built our dinosaur casts, and they have this ability to scan objects and then cut them with a computer carver into different scale versions of the real thing, and then coat them with tough coatings. And I'm imagining not only companies like Research Castings, but I think there's a whole bright future with 3D digital printing in a museum setting for you to be able to produce stand-ins for your artifacts that will allow people access to them. And imagine being able to scan something in your museum and then print it and take it home. The last two here are one of the many providers of LED flat panels, and the final one is a company we worked with recently called Kiosk Pro that offer both the kind of housings that you can build iPad into, and the software you can readily adapt to put your own content onto. And with that, I am out of a speaking voice, and I'll turn it back over to our hosts.
Well, thank you, Dave, for that excellent presentation. I think that has given everyone a lot to think about and act on and share with members of their own organizations. I am now going to pass the mic over to Elke Weinstein, Museum and Heritage Advisor with the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and Sport. This is your opportunity to ask questions specifically about the Ministry's exhibition standard itself. So please type any questions you have in the chat and send them to everyone or to the presenters.
Okay, can everyone hear me? I would like to thank Dave and the ROM both for doing this webinar. This has been very, very interesting and exactly what we had in mind. Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay, good. And I actually had a question for Dave. I personally had a question for Dave, but if anybody else has questions, please type them into the chat now, because we do have a couple of minutes. Just wanted to say that the emphasis on shared costs, on accessing resources in your own communities, on layers of interpretation and redundancy, all of those things are things that people with budgets that are smaller than the ROMs can absolutely do, and a lot of it has to do with planning. And actually that was the question that I had for Dave, is when you are, I know you've done a lot of evaluation of your actual, your accessibility guidelines and your accessibility, the ways you address accessibility in exhibits, but do you do formative and summative evaluation, and when you do you make corrections?
Thanks, Aka. It's a great question. We do one thing, which is we have a checklist that we've begged, borrowed, or stolen pieces of it from other places that have been doing these things. And of course, sharing information about how people have tried things is really a significant part of what we all can be doing. And we live in a world where that sharing is way more readily available to us all. We do all kinds of testing now, and we have actually added a whole kind of visitor engagement testing group back into the ROM. We haven't had it for many years, and so we have now a full-time position. So we're very fortunate and able to have a full-time position. But before we did have that position, we conducted all kinds of testing. And so this amounts to taking the checklist at the front end, making sure that every exhibit actually has a budget line that's absolutely dedicated to access features, and it can't be touched by anything else that's trying to borrow from that line item in the budget. So it's a very protected piece of the budget. We learn from what we see in one exhibit and we apply it to the next. So you won't find us, for example, going down into a major exhibition after it's opened and making a lot of changes. Although if there's an egregious error, yeah, we'll be down there fixing it. But we do topic testing, we do focus group testing of ideas and ways of going about conducting the experience of an exhibit with the focus groups. We probe both the kinds of visitors that we all have, that we all share, that are frequent visitors, as well as those that, with just the right kind of way of going about things, we might get them to decide to come. And we also do testing even with people that we know will never come, because there's always learning there as well. Then we do the kind of analysis that you saw there where we're looking through the security cameras. I encourage all of the team who work on exhibitions to spend time in the major exhibits. In fact, I have a kind of minimum time I want all of my own staff to spend, and at both light traffic periods and very heavy visitation periods. Those insane periods over the Christmas break or during March break, for example, are really good learning opportunities. And so the major way we apply learning is to the next big thing.
Okay, well, thank you, Elka, for your participation today, and I want to thank Dave again for that. That was fantastic, and thank everyone for listening and being patient while we work through some of our technical issues. And we'd again like to thank the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and Sport for their support of this webinar series and for the Ministry staff's active participation. And as I mentioned at the beginning, the slides and the recording of this webinar will be posted on the CMOG Standards Resources page of the OMA website shortly, and I will also be sending out a link to the webinar evaluation later today. And as I also mentioned, we have one more webinar upcoming in our Spring Summer Learning series that is now open for registration. So please do visit the OMA website, museumsontario.com, to check it out. Thank you again, everyone, and have a great day.